Hey, welcome to episode 5 of Over My Head Podcast. I'm Aaron Ruby.
Will, that's me. Camera change. There it is.
It's always funny to me. I just can't get over it. I
hmm
apparently am a child.
There you go.
Cool. Yeah, I just sent out a tweet, so maybe we'll get a viewer. That would be awesome. Yeah, today we're talking about how to take pictures of starry night skies. It's kind of different from normal photography. You're generally doing really long exposures, and there's a lot of quirky stuff that comes along with that.
Yeah, I normally compare it to fishing. It's very low key. It takes a long time. A lot of the times you don't get what you want. It works out.
Uh, you're saying the process of taking time lapses is like,
Nighttime
yeah,
photography, yeah.
yeah, because when you set up a camera to do time lapses, you've got a couple hours to kill waiting for it to.
Alright, so you might as well fish, I guess is what I'm saying. So just bring a tackle box.
Because at least then, at least then you'd have
Something to eat.
something to eat. No,
Yeah,
that makes
yeah.
sense. All right. Well, yeah, next time we'll go fishing.
There you go.
We do generally like make a campfire if it's allowed, hang out, look for Andromeda,
Have beer.
have a beer.
Yeah.
Yep, totally. Um, yeah, so there's a few things I wanted to cover. So first off, um, when you're doing this, you need to be able to control the camera. You can't use like manual settings when you're doing night time lapses. You need to like,
Automatic settings. You mean.
yeah, sorry, you can't use automatic settings. You can't use program mode really. You definitely can't use like auto ISO or any of those things that you would kind of normally rely on if you're just shooting pictures of your cat.
And why is that? Heh.
Because like when you're doing star photography, you need to do like 20 to 30-second exposures. Uh, when you're taking that long of an exposure, noise becomes a really big issue. Like you want your camera very light sensitive, so you need that high ISO. But at the same time, like you'll see that noise more than in any kind of photography, really, because the shutter is just open forever, and the
Mhm.
sensor has time for those like weird, staticky, noisy things to build up.
But so specifically, we need manual for star stuff because the camera can't figure it out, right? Like
It,
the auto metering just doesn't know what to do. It's
right.
set up
Under
for a
under
different situation.
right. Auto metering is looking for a subject in front of the camera that's kind of lit by something, and when you point it up in the sky, it can't see the stars against the random noise that it's perceiving. It really can't meter for it.
Right.
It'll try, but it generally wouldn't do a very good job.
And even if it could, the other reason we need to do manual, of course, is because of time lapsing. So we want consistency frame to frame to frame. So we can't have
Right,
the camera deciding, "No, I'm going to make this one a little bit brighter than last time."
right. Because what's going to happen down the road is once you have like a few hundred photos, you're going to stick those all together as individual frames in a video file.
Right.
And if you have your settings changing from shot to shot, which would happen if you left it in any sort of automatic mode, you'd get flickering, like a bright shot, a dark shot, like all together as the camera was doing its best to figure out what you were intending for that shot. You really can't give it any choices.
Right, and the same thing applies for focus, right? So we're completely manual, focus is manual, and then all of the camera's exposure settings are manual.
Right, and focus is tricky because even when you're kind of focusing manually with a DSLR, a lot of times you're using like an autofocus point in the center of the frame or wherever and setting that focus and then taking the picture. And you're telling it where to focus, but you're kind of relying on that auto system.
Right, and so that auto system works a couple of different ways depending on your camera, but again, it needs to be able to see something to be able to focus on.
Right, and it's just, again, it's just too dark to even find stars. What a lot of people do for focusing on star time lapses, they'll put their camera into like a live view mode and they'll crank their ISO to the very highest setting, like settings beyond where you would ever shoot, because
And
you
that's
just
the
want to.
sensitivity of the sensor, just in case someone watching doesn't know what that is for some reason.
It's true. It's true. Yeah, so when you crank up that sensitivity, it can make those really dark stars kind of a little bit brighter, and hopefully you can see them. You can A lot of cameras have that zoom in feature where you can kind of preview the
Right, so you're
focus.
seeing a live image of what the camera sees, and then you can see just a little tiny bit of it and zoom that in.
Right,
You
so
can see it bigger.
like on my camera it goes 5 times zoom, 10 times zoom, and then you'll find one of those tiny points of light, which is a star, and you'll
Right.
manually adjust the lens focus until that's a perfect point instead of like a little blurry, smudgy point.
Right.
Um, and that's hugely important. Like if you don't set that first, you'll do a 2-hour time lapse, and
Won't see anything.
you won't like it.
Yeah.
Even if you see anything, it'll just be a blurry shot. So focus is like even more critical for time lapse, starry skyish stuff than
Right.
almost anything.
So maybe let's back up. So we're going through this process. We have the dolly that we've talked about ad nauseum set up. We've
Right.
got it's working maybe. We're assuming it is, and it's all good to go. And we put a camera on it. So what do you do first? Like we talk about a little bit where we place the dolly based on composition and what we think it's going to look at either end because we want to get a nice looking resolve.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to talk about like just taking a single photo. Like
Okay.
if you're
All right.
not doing a time lapse, like even more basic,
Okay.
just one photo. Like what are you thinking about? Because sometimes we get so caught up in like we're doing a motion time lapse that we don't
Right.
think enough about composition. We try
Mm-hmm.
to think about it because like we're into that, but
No,
if
absolutely.
if you're thinking about a single frame, it's almost better to really get that shot perfect
Right.
because you're going to be sitting in that moment for a long time. So
Mm-hmm.
no motion dolly. Like if you're just taking a shot of the night sky that you're trying to get it to turn out,
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at a few things. You're looking at, let's say, a 30-second exposure. You're looking at a fast lens, so a 2.8. That's the f-stop value, or the aperture value on the lens.
And that's a measure, a rough measure of how big a hole the lens has in it to let light in.
Right, like how much light can even come into the camera. Like
Right.
some lenses have a huge hole, like a 50 millimeter 1.4 has an enormous, just like inch wide hole that light can pour through. But zoom lenses often have slower speed just because there's so many more mechanisms involved in that.
Right.
So lens choice wise, you're looking at a wide prime lens, a wide lens because you want to get that cool field of view, a
So
nice
what
wide.
do you mean by wide? So a telephoto is a long lens.
Telephotos, yeah, long lens is anything like beyond like 50 millimeter equivalency.
And what does
Uh,
that do to your picture?
so your field of view is smaller.
Right.
So for like stars, you're seeing less stars.
Yeah.
Widening it out also helps it just because of the physics of the lens. It makes it easier to focus. Like
Right.
more things are going to be in focus at a particular f-stop at a wider lens.
The other thing that's useful about a wide lens is because these exposures are so long, like on the order of 30 seconds, the stars move. So if you're zoomed in on them, you start to see them streak out more than if
Right. The amount of motion they make is kind of like that angle. That value is like really equivalent to. Megan's making popcorn right now. Do you
No,
hear that?
that's good. It's putting that's our sponsor for today's episode.
Sponsored by Jiffy Pop.
There we
It's the
go.
poppiest.
Chintzy Pop, I think is
Yeah.
what it is.
For that, yeah, it might be. Great. So, train of thought completely derailed.
So no, we have a
Oh.
wide lens, a wide fast lens on the
Oh, so we're talking about when stars are moving, everything's spinning, the Earth is spinning, we're moving around the sun, all that's happening.
trying not to
So
think about
it's the buttery smell, Will. It's just like
it.
pervading my.
Everything is spinning.
Oh my goodness. This is this is live television, guys.
No, I think we're due for an episode that needs an edit. I think the last one was
I
live
don't
to tape.
I don't want to. I think this is awesome.
All right, fair enough. Do you
Everything's
get popcorn for the edits? Okay, sorry. Everything is spinning.
and the longer you leave the shutter open, the more time obviously there is to see that travel. So even if
Right.
the stars are moving very, very slowly, you can start to perceive that motion. You're instead of getting little points, you'll get these little streaks. And you might have seen those images where people like stack exposures of the night
Right. You can
sky,
intentionally do that.
and they
Nice
get those
effect.
sweet like
Yeah.
swirly night skies. It's a cool effect, but when you're just trying to get like the perfect picture of this night sky, the wide lens helps you out because that movement is less perceptible.
Yeah. It's the same amount of move, but because the camera's zoomed out, it's just you don't see it.
Yeah, the angle relative to the size of the field of view is smaller, so it's
Right.
harder to see. Um,
Okay, so we got a fast wide lens. It's on the
right.
camera. We're
Mhm.
presumably on a tripod, right?
Right, you have to be on a tripod
Right.
because you just can't hold a shot handheld for that long and not have it be a blurry mess.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
a sturdy rock would do.
yeah.
Um,
Well, and hopefully kind of a heavy tripod. They sell a lot of cheap tripods around, but they'll
right.
get even blown by the wind.
Yeah.
The
30
ground
seconds
might
is a
shake.
long time. Yeah.
Anything could happen, and any bump really does affect the final image.
Right.
Um, but I also wanted to say, like, this is not a cheap lens, like
Oh yeah.
photography niche. The more expensive prime lenses are made to a higher quality standard. They're sharper. You can get a
Right.
crisper
Particularly
image out of them.
in the edges. Um, so like the center of the frame is going to be the crispest, sharpest, most in focus point on a lot of lenses. And then as
Right.
you get further out here, it's going to start to get a little soupy or teardrop shapy. Um, you can basically fix that problem with liberal application of money by buying better and better lenses.
Right. Yeah, so you're looking at an expensive, wide, fast lens.
You can rent lenses, which is something we've done in the
We do
past.
that all the
And I
time.
recommend.
Every time we go out, we end up renting gear because it's relatively cheap compared to owning gear.
Yeah, I rented a 15 millimeter Zeiss lens for like $100 for a couple of days. It was not bad.
It's awesome. Yeah, and what did we use? We used your 16 to 35. That's an awesome star photography lens.
Yeah, so that's a lens I actually own. I foolishly own. And then there's also a lens we've used in the past is a Rokinon 14 millimeter, which I was actually going to look to see if we could rent for the looming trip with Greg,
We
but I
should.
have not looked. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of the size you're looking at, 14, 16, somewhere in there. Um, Super fast. You can get epic star photos with that.
Yeah.
And then ISO wise, you're kind of
Again, that's
looking
the
at
sensitivity.
right. And sensitivity performance has really gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. Like I own a 7D over 1600. It starts to really look like garbage.
Yeah.
So it goes like 400, 800, 1600, 3200, which is really, really noisy, really terrible looking.
Right.
Um, the same setting, the same amount of sensitivity on like a 6D or a
Which is the
5D
camera.
Mark III
Yeah.
will look so much better. So
Right. And that's just due to technology improving
it's
in the
got
3 or 4 years between those two cameras.
it's really gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
The other problem with using a crop sensor camera like the 7D is that it's going to zoom in any of your lenses that you're using slightly.
Right. So the lens projects a certain size image on the sensor. In my 6D, the sensor is the size of that projected image within reason. On the 7D, the sensor is smaller than that projected image, so you lose the stuff around the edges. And that's what we're talking about when we say crop sensor.
Yeah, so like you might think, oh, I've got this 50-1.8, it's a really fast lens. I could do some star photography with that. And yes, you can, but if you have a 7D also, like I've done this, 7D with a 50 on it, it's working like more like it's an 85. It's a pretty tight lens, so you're
Right.
seeing a pretty small section of the sky,
Yeah.
and it's not as like epic as a wide shot of
At
the
least
sky.
yeah, I mean, for the sort of stuff we're doing, it wouldn't work. You
Right.
could probably make something happen. You could probably also use a tracking mount or something more elaborate
Hmm.
to do something. But yeah, for the stuff we're doing, it just wouldn't really work.
Right, and we should probably say like uh, we're talking about like full sky, night sky photography, like big field of stars.
Yep.
Very different from um, astronomy photography, like attaching a camera to a telescope and then taking a picture of like Jupiter.
Right.
Those guys are using like tracking mounts, like Will mentioned, and things like
Yeah.
that to get like really great still shots close up of Jupiter, of the moon, of that sort of thing.
Right.
And it's really not at all what we're talking about.
So back again, where we got a fast wide lens, we got a camera with a relatively high noise setting or ISO
Right.
setting. Um,
Yeah, and the higher you can go with your ISO for night photography, the better off you're going to be until the
except
point
that
where you're like,
noise.
this is so noisy looking.
Right.
So,
And then the last remaining part of the exposure triangle, right? So you have to do a 30-second or so exposure, depending on what your ISO is set at. And that also introduces noise because the sensor generates heat as it's working. So you kind of have to balance those two noise sources a little bit as well.
right.
You couldn't do a really, really long exposure and a really, really low ISO setting because the sensor would get hot and you'd still get as much noise.
Yeah, so that's the three things. It's like, say you're at f2.8 on a lens, you're doing a 30-second exposure, and you're at least 1600, but hopefully your camera can handle 3200
Right.
and pull off a decent image. Um, that's kind of what's going to make you able to take cool star photos. Like the stars at that shutter length or that exposure time really start to like pop off of the
Yeah.
background.
The other thing that I wanted to mention, and I'm blanking on it now that I started talking. So,
You will start to see like false stars.
right. Hot
Something
spots on
on
your sensor.
right. So your sensor in a normal mode, like when you're taking pictures in daylight, it might have little tiny pixels on it that are permanently on, like permanently registering as being hit by light.
Yeah, and it's just
But
a defect.
you're not going to notice them very much. It happens as those sensors age too. You see more and more of those.
Right.
Um, but when you're taking a 30-second exposure, it really, 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 you see those burnt-in pixels. If you test, the way to test for that is if you, with no lens on your camera, if you put like the body cap onto it and do a 30-second exposure at a high
Right. So
ISO,
no light is getting into your camera. It's just
right,
focused.
and then you look at that resulting image, it should be totally black, but generally you're going to be able to look around it and see spots where you see little red or little white pixels
Right.
that
And
are,
that's those stuck.
right, and they're called hot pixels, and they just will always be in your image. You
Yeah.
can clean it up in a light, like a program like Lightroom
Or Photoshop.
or Photoshop. If you're doing single image, Photoshop, awesome, but if you're doing hundreds and hundreds of photos in the time lapse that you just shot, then
Right.
Lightroom is kind of awesome. You can automate, batch that process to fix your hot pixels.
So what I wanted to say, I remembered now. So you have these settings on your camera. You focused by zooming in on that live view, hopefully. If you don't have a live view, something you can do is you can turn up your settings to some ridiculous degree and take pictures, and then zoom in and check, and then make a little change and take a picture and zoom in and check. But that's actually what I wanted to say, is you can't really see that well what the camera is pointed at, even when you're focusing. So what we do is we turn the ISO up and we start taking pictures to do framing, right, to figure
Right.
out what we're pointed at.
Yeah, you'll take a test shot, maybe like a 10-second exposure at a really crazy, ridiculous ISO, like 6400.
Right, just
or
to
even
see what the
higher.
foreground looks like and kind of
Right.
where is the horizon level.
Right, just to check your framing, make sure that's set up perfectly before you commit to like the real 30-second exposures. Because
Right.
even if you do 2 or 3 of them, you're committing a lot of time to get that image.
Right.
Cool. What else do people need to know? There's got to be other tricks that we've come up with.
Yes, well,
If we move on to talking about actual like time lapse stuff,
yeah, go ahead.
um, when we do the motion time lapse, we like to add like a foreground element. If you just take a picture, a motion time lapse where your dolly's moving, it could be moving like 20 feet. But if there's no foreground
Yeah, if you
for
can only see the
the
sky.
field of stars to be like moving in parallax against, you won't be able to perceive that motion. The stars are so far away.
Yeah, and the stars are moving.
Right. So it's like find some cool foreground, and that'll really make the images pop. Shooting through trees, it doesn't seem like it would be a good idea when you're taking like star photos, but
Yeah, it can
um,
work out.
it can really look spectacular when you
Or
have like
cool
a
structures, or
right,
yeah.
just
The other
normal.
thing we've done, like you can shoot around fires and that sort of thing, and light up tents,
Hmm.
that kind of thing. You did.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I was just laughing about us putting that little lantern in the
Lantern in the
tent.
tent. It looked really good in the time lapse, but then the tent was full of bugs. The
I forgot about that.
yeah, price you pay. But you mentioned that you wanted to focus on individual frame composition, so like having a foreground is a good thing to provide some context. What else? Like any other tips on that, on what to focus on to get a good? I mean, composition obviously it's a little subjective and it's all art really. But
Right.
any tips on that?
Um, to me, it's kind of like it's either you're focusing on the stars or you're kind of focusing on how the light from the sky, whether it's the moon or the clouds that have light from a city reflected on them, are like interacting with the landscape.
Hmm.
Because really, when you're that wide, you're taking landscape photos
Right,
that happen to have this amazing sky element.
right,
Um, and that's just something to think about. Like you should think of it as landscape. You want to be really level. You want to
right.
find like that cool rock or that cool interesting structure or like those leading lines.
You want to be in a cool landscape.
You travel to an exotic place that has a cool
Right.
landscape.
One thing I just recalled that we forgot to mention too in our camera settings, color temperature. And you can fix this in post.
Right.
Obviously, you're shooting RAW if you're doing this, if your camera is able.
Well,
Um,
maybe not obviously. You should shoot raw.
yeah, you really should.
You're gonna want to do post production on these pictures. They're even at that 30-second exposure, they're not going to be as bright as
Right,
you
out of
want. They're not
camera,
going to
yeah.
have like they're going to be too noisy. You're going to need to do noise reduction. Um, but yeah, continue. What were you saying?
Oh, so if you were shooting JPEG for some reason, because you couldn't do RAW, uh, normally we do a tungsten color temperature, isn't that right, Aaron?
I like that just because
It makes the stars kind of blue.
it makes it all blue, which I
Yeah.
think is kind of cool. You don't see it a lot. But again, it's raw. Raw is like a equivalent of a digital negative. You're able to
Yeah.
change that color correction or that color temperature.
Yeah, without any loss of quality in post, but
Right. I can show that. I have my Lightroom open if you
yeah,
want to
so
look at
let's
something.
go ahead and swap over. Do you have any examples of like framing shots or shots with the wrong settings we can compare against? I should have brought my own.
I'm
I
sure.
have I have terrible pictures that I could have shown.
I can show you like beginning and ending of. I don't have everything in front of me right now, but I can show you beginning and ending of a dolly shot, like
Okay.
first picture versus last picture.
Yeah, let's go ahead and switch over.
Yeah, hold on. Let me stream my screen. All right. So you guys are seeing this?
Yes, we
All
are.
right. So this is the trip we did to Shaver Lake, up in the mountains east of Fresno. Um,
It's in the Sierras.
yeah. So it's kind of near Yosemite, Kings Canyon, that area, and you can see that there's a moon. It depends on what you're trying to do, but sometimes the moon is really difficult to work with. You can see that it's very overexposed here.
Yeah, it looks like the sun.
It's kind of a cool effect in this image. Fortunately, it wasn't rising on this weekend until like a little after midnight, so we had
Yeah.
time to shoot
And this
totally
was in the
clear
winter time
skies.
too, so we had quite a bit of time, I think. Wasn't it in the winter time?
It was between midnight and 1 that the moon was rising for
Yeah.
us. Um, But so in this image, this is the beginning of a motion time lapse that we're doing. So
Right.
you
So
can kind of see that.
using the fraught dolly that we've spent so much time talking about.
Yeah, this is like the starting point for a move, and really like you kind of look at this and think, well, that giant rock is kind of obscuring what could be a cool picture of the lake.
Right.
Um, which is kind of okay because like this is sort of an unbalanced image that becomes better as it moves. It
Right.
becomes like a more satisfying composition by the time you get to the end of the track.
Mhm.
There's a shot kind of near. Oh, this is actually a different spot, but it's similar to what I'm talking about, where like you're out from behind the tree, you can kind of suddenly see this view of
Right.
what you're looking at. Here, let
Yeah,
me
so
pull this up here.
as the time lapse progressed and it's strung together into a video, the idea was we would start kind of obscured and then it would slowly be this dramatic reveal. Maybe not that slowly, in 10 seconds. Be this dramatic reveal of the lake and the sky and be all nice.
Right, and it kind of you get to a point where it would become more interesting.
Right.
Let me see if I can. There we go. Okay, so let me. So this is kind of the middle of the move. This is the very beginning. Test shots, obviously. Headlamps being shown. You can.
Right.
Do you see the whole screen, or are you just seeing the center?
Seeing just the center little bit.
Okay. So let me
I
just
mean, the
full
full
screen
image,
that.
I should say, but
But it's cropped in the center.
yes.
So this is a test shot, obviously. You're seeing us a lot of light pollution from our headlamps while
This
we're
is where we're
getting
fiddling around with the camera for framing.
trying to figure out like this is the beginning. This is starting position for the dolly. This is near the end.
Yeah, so we actually are sliding the dolly down, probably taking another picture.
hmm And then you can kind of see it might be difficult with the streaming, but you can see the motion of this a little bit.
Right, yeah, the clouds. And that change shot to shot is what would happen if you had left the camera on automatic. So now that we're in the actual time lapse, it looks like, you notice it's not randomly flickering frame to frame. And then it just did, now that I say that. But yeah,
Yeah,
so that's,
what you're seeing is Lightroom catching up to the color correction that was
right,
applied. So like it's level now. Now I think we're caught up. So we're actually seeing
right. The way,
that's a raw shot, and then it'll snap into its color corrected leveled shot.
right, there it is.
Yeah. So yeah, you're fixing rotation, you're fixing color correction to get the effects you want. Here, let me move to the end of this particular shot. I'm looking at pictures of us coming back to the dolly and being like, what's
Oh.
going on?
This particular shot, I think the dolly caught in the center, so it didn't
Yeah,
complete the
it was
move.
our very first one of that weekend.
Yep.
And we hadn't quite figured out the dolly at this point, so
Yeah.
yeah, this is where it ended. So it opens up a little bit, becomes more satisfying as a frame.
Yeah. And it would have gone a little farther, but we messed up.
Here, let me see if that's really the end.
I think it took a lot of shots
Yeah.
at that same location.
Mhm. So that's the end frame.
Yeah,
So you're out from behind that big rock.
right.
Maybe
And you
go
can
back
see how
to
much
this.
the moon has moved as well.
It's
We're real
true.
close to that.
Yeah, it was probably in this position for an hour and a half.
Yeah. Well, and that's so it's 30-second exposures. The time-lapse dolly takes a second or two to move. It gives the camera 5 to 10 seconds to think to save the picture. So you're talking 40 seconds per shot, and you need how many to make 10 seconds of video? 300, right?
Yeah, 30 frames per second.
So 300 times 40 seconds is 12,000 seconds. Or, yeah, 12,000 shots.
That's right. That's a lot. Generally, usually I'm working 24 frames a second, so I'm
Right.
hoping to get at least 240 images out of any given time lapse, which
Right.
would give me about 10 seconds worth of video,
Yeah.
which is maybe a little bit more than you would need, but you never know what the application is going to be. So
Yeah.
I love the shot. Here, let me switch to one of my favorites.
Can we see something maybe with a more evident star field too, so we can kind of see what we mean about focusing and stuff? In
Sure.
this one, we had there was the light of the moon, so we were a little bit helped by that.
Here, let me. I'll have to reconnect this one, but I think it'll be worth it. How long until we go on that next trip, though?
Let's see. A little less than a month, not very much
That's
less.
awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry, it'll just take me 1 second to reconnect this.
Mm-hmm.
So this particular trip, we had 4 cameras going pretty much the entire time we were out there.
Yeah, so there were some just stationary on tripods or splayed out on little tripods on the ground. There was one on the dolly, and then there was another one. I have a nice point and shoot that I had on my person just to actually use as a camera while the other cameras were working.
So you're seeing this image?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so this is a 16 millimeter lens. And you can tell it's a little older of a lens, a little beat up. The edges are very soft, but it's kind of a cool effect anyhow.
Yeah. Can you turn on or just tell us maybe what the settings are on this actual picture?
Yeah. Are you able to see it there?
No.
Okay, let me switch my screen sharing so it's a little more useful.
So remember we were saying about a 30-second, 1600 or 3200 ISO.
Yeah, so this is 25 seconds.
Right.
f3.2, so it's a 2.8 lens, and if you stop down just a little bit, you'll get a lot sharper.
Yeah, so stop down means closing the aperture, making a smaller hole.
Right, so even though this lens is capable of a 2.8, it helps us a little bit to be slightly close from that 3.2.
Right.
And then we had the ISO cranked to 6400.
Right.
And we can see that noise when we zoom in.
Right.
This is like after noise reduction. Let me show you actually what it looks like before. So this is Adobe Lightroom. It's awesome for organization and for photo editing. Cool. So right now, I don't have a ton of noise reduction on this image.
Not that much.
That's wild.
Can you like make a virtual copy and reset it so we can see what it looked like straight out of camera?
Sure.
So this is with the one we're looking at right now has Aaron's post-production applied, which varies situation to situation. Generally, Aaron, are there steps you follow when you're post-processing these?
Yeah, I'll generally start with an image in the middle of a time-lapse sequence.
Okay.
And I'll set that to kind of a look that I like. I'll crush the blacks a bit, increase the contrast, like boost the highlights, which are the stars. Take down the noise, and if there's any chromatic aberration, you can pull that out too.
Right, and that is color kind of splitting. In a white light, the edges of it become colored. It's a optical property of the lens.
When you zoom in, you can really see that happening. So like this is we're looking at the raw image. You can see that it's a little like milky.
Yeah.
The sky you can tell that there's a lot of stars up there, but they're not like popping.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of gray in the sky too. So what
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to do was give it a ton of contrast and really make it um, so that the stars are kind of like just blasting off of the image.
Right.
Um,
So
so
then,
I
yeah, when we look at the your edit there.
right. Yeah, so you can see it's much more contrasty. Like you're not seeing a ton of detail in those trees, which
Right.
I'm totally fine with, and I'm really like enhancing that blue because I think it's so cool for stars.
Right.
Let's go back. So that's the same image, just treated.
Yep.
So yeah, the post production, I think we'll talk about that more, but it's a hugely important step.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you can get like even Aaron and I, if we were editing this image, would probably get to different places just because we do stuff in a different order or whatever. So there's quite a bit of room to interpret as long as you get a good exposure in camera. Like you
Right,
can fix a little bit, maybe even a lot of it, but you gotta get in the neighborhood. Like if your focus is bad, sorry.
right.
Like you're kinda it's kind of a blown shot.
Yeah, and you can see the focus is it's pretty sharp. Like this is near the center of the image.
Yeah, so you really do have pretty tight points of light.
Right, really tight in the dead center here.
Yeah,
This particular lens gets softer and softer at the edges, so you can
right.
kind of see it really starts to blur out. And direction-wise, you can kind of see, I don't know if you can see my cursor there.
Yep.
You can kind of see that this star's sort of traveling this direction,
Right.
the star this direction, all around like a point that the North Star is the only one that's not moving, so they're all kind of swirling around.
Yeah.
This star over here is kind of going more this way.
Right.
And you can see that they're not points, they're really like little UFO shapes.
Yeah, and some of that is the barrel distortion of the
It's the lens
lens, and then
distortion,
yeah,
yeah.
some of it is the move.
Yeah, this is a 16 millimeter wide angle lens. It's really got a lot of distortion on it.
Yeah, and it's a fisheye as well, right? This one isn't disted
Yeah,
down or whatever.
it's not a circular fisheye, but it is fishing eye. It is fishing out quite a
Yeah.
bit. But the cool thing about it is that we're almost getting horizon to horizon, and you're seeing this pretty
Yeah, the whole expanse of the sky.
the entire Milky Way that we
Right.
can see, which is crazy.
And it's worth noting this picture was taken at Shaver Lake, which is one of the darkest places I've ever been.
It's
Um,
crazy dark. The
yeah,
only
really,
light
really dark.
pollution you're seeing is like a little bit of reflection off of these wispy clouds. You're seeing that from somewhere in the Central Valley of California.
Yeah.
Okay, so settings-wise, you can see that all of these are zeroed out here on the
Hmm.
uncorrected image.
Right.
And then I'm really pushing around those pixels. Contrast is all the way up.
Hmm.
I'm trying to pull up the highlights like I was talking about to make those stars pop a little more.
Right.
And just crushing those blacks even more with the shadow being negative, and whites just trying to make the stars have that contrast. Histogram wise, it's all over here in shadow. You're not seeing a
Yeah.
ton of pixels that are bright, but that's kind of the nature of this part of
Right. Yeah.
photography.
With star photography, I mean, it's nighttime. It's dark. So.
Yeah, this histogram for the uncorrected image, you can see there's more pixels in the gray, but
Yeah, they're
to
not really
me,
doing anything for
it's
us.
just a flat. This is a flat image,
Yeah.
whereas this is pretty sweet to me. Subjective, of course.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, if you go out and you take star photos, you're welcome to edit them differently. Um, but this is the thing. This is what we've got working through our workflow.
Yeah, so this is an image from later in this sequence. You can see that the clouds are moving across. That's giving us, this is a um,
Shot.
static shot. It's not on a motion dolly, but
Yeah.
it's got great movement because the clouds are kind of whipping through.
Right. And because it's over such a long period of time, like I don't even think they were moving that quickly. It wasn't like a super windy night.
Not that you would like notice that they were moving. So
Yeah.
look at this shot. I'm not sure about this time being totally accurate, but this is saying the last shot in the sequence is 10 p.m.
Right.
The first shot in that sequence, 8:02. So that's a 2-hour.
Right. Needless to say, you go through batteries on these outings. Worth bringing.
We will have to do an entire episode about just the gear that
Yeah,
you
what do you put in your car?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fortunately, every time we've done this, we've been car camping, so we get away with bringing way more stuff than we could have if we'd been hiking out in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. Well, is there anything else that you want to cover, or?
I just as a quick just demonstration that we don't need that exact tool chain. I want to share my screen here just a second. So this is a picture taken on the same trip, and it was taken with my point and shoot. It's an X100. It's a nice point and shoot, but it's just a small
Got a
little thing.
really nice lens, so
And it's a really sharp lens. And this was taken. Aaron and I were sitting watching the time-lapse dolly.
Yeah, I remember
having
the
a beer.
I remember the shot's awesome.
And this was that camera doesn't work with the electronic triggers for exposure. So it's like sat on a tripod in front of us. We're sitting watching the dolly move, and I'm manually triggering it with a cable release, which is like the old way of doing it. And this is a 20-second exposure at 6400 ISO, the same sorts of values that we were talking about.
What's the aperture on that?
It's at 2. So
okay.
So it's about in that same ballpark, and this is that same night. And on post-processing, I did a similar thing. I didn't crush the blacks quite as much because it's all sky. So I wanted some definition in the color of the black. And then this here, this is like why the shot is cool, right? Is the Andromeda galaxy is like there, like very apparently, which is pretty rad.
Yeah, once it gets zoomed in, just let it sit for a second.
Oh, okay.
Watch it resolve.
Can that come through?
You're seeing it. It's not obviously
Yeah.
it's not the best medium for looking at.
Pixel peeping.
Yeah, but it's wild.
Anyway, so that's a very different piece of equipment, but for single shots, like definitely something like that's doable. It just takes knowing what your equipment can do.
Yeah, and being able, as long as you can control it manually,
right,
you can get shots like that.
Let's turn off screen.
I love that shot because in person, when you look at that shot, like Andromeda is really popping out of it.
Right, and that's, I mean, yeah, it looked just like that. You could look up and see it. It was crazy.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
Well, I think that wraps it up for this week.
Absolutely. So what are we talking about next time?
Well, we can talk more about workflow-wise. Like, we try to focus a little bit on just doing single images today, but
right.
When we do set up either intervalometers or the time-lapse dolly and do lots and lots of shots.
And those are electronically triggering the camera, an intervalometer to do time-lapses.
Right. What we need to do is make corrections to large numbers of photos in a series.
Right.
And then also assemble those photos into a single video file, which I think that's what we're going to talk about next week.
Okay, that sounds good.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. We'll talk to you later.